Okay, I'm going to paint a tree right here. So I'm back on my color theory and paint canvas that I started. You can see that the background is a lot of very muted light colors. So that's going to drop back behind my bolder colors that I'm about to put in the foreground. I'm going to start with the very gray shade of brown. So this area doesn't look that interesting to me, so I'm going to cover it up with the tree. I'll just start by making gray. You're going to see me dipping down here below the camera. I've got all my usual paints, cans of interior acrylic latex paint. It's water-based, and the sheen is either satin or eggshell. Not very shiny. It's just a low sheen. And the brush that I use is, this is a Purdy angled, it's just a very typical angled cut, like a contractor's paintbrush. You just get it at a hardware store. So, tree. Let's make it a little bit brown. Brown is just orange and black. So let's add a little red and yellow in this to get a little bit of brown to this gray. I always keep a bucket of water handy, and I'm going to be dipping into that like I am right now, just to help the paint flow out nice and quick and smooth. Now it's got a lot of red tone in it, and a little more yellow. You know, just because I mix these colors with the primaries, red, yellow, and blue, doesn't mean you have to. You can always just have the colors pre-mixed. Once you figure out what you need, how you get there is up to you. So I'm just going to make this nice straight tree trunk, put a little bit of a kink in it, make it look a little more believable. Actually, this will be a big limb coming off of it. I'm starting to run out of paint here, so I add some more. Little white. My white's way over here, so I have to keep going way over there again. I should move that white. Over here. White. This is ridiculous. Look at this. Here's my paint stack right here. All stacked on all of my junk in this little spare room that I use for an office. So, what is that? I wasn't watching what I was doing there. Okay, we got a tree coming up. What should I do with this here? I think I'll go branch out like that, and then maybe the rest of the tree will. So let's start by taking this very muted brownish gray. It's not especially dark. I'm going to shadow the side of it that is away from the light. So I already have established that my light is coming from the right side across these mountains. I need to stay consistent with all of the objects in the picture. So this right side is going to be my bright light. This is going to be my dim, indirect light, like what I have on this dark side of these mountains. So I'm going to start by putting a dark shadow on this front, right here, left side. Now, rather than just doing a dark side and a light side, I'm going to have two light sources, one that's dimmer, one that's brighter, and I'm going to have a darkest shadow area. So this shadow area is towards the left, but I'm leaving this very left edge for a little bit of a backlight coming this way. Just like this snow has got this blue kind of glow to it. I'm going to do the same thing on this tree. So a little more of this. Put some up in here. This branch will come up like that. Oh. And then this is going underneath. This is a downward facing edge, so that needs to be darker than the rest. Okay, I'm about ready to start with my bark texture now. Let's start with starting to build the brighter tones on the right side. So the way that you create texture on something is by the higher areas are brighter because they're in the light. So I'm going to start with larger areas that are just a little bit lighter, and then as I work within those small highlights that I make, I'm going to keep getting brighter colors. Let me show you. So see how I'm making these vertical patterns. The bark can be any kind of shape or texture that you want, but what it tends to have in common is that as a tree grows, it splits. That hard shell of bark on the very outside splits while new bark grows underneath, and it causes vertical split patterns. And so I'm going to try to connect these vertical areas and leave dark vertical patterns in between. Okay, I'll show you what I mean. I should have mixed that color up there. I'm going to mix some, so you can see it, I'm going to mix the color I'm using right here. So I'm going like this. I'm just doing red, yellow, black, and white. Red, yellow. The black and white, just mute the color to a gray. The red and yellow, make it a brown. Now, as I get towards the very edge of the tree, I'm going to have tighter, thinner patterns, because that's where the bark is changing the angle, and it's all going to be tighter together because you're looking at it like this instead of like this. That's one of the things that causes this trunk to look round, is the changing texture of the bark as it gets near the edge. See these tight little vertical lines? I can also just tap the edge of my brush like this to get that same kind of vertical line look. Just like this. As I get more towards the middle, wider patterns. Like this. Now this is casting a shadow, so I want to be careful not to make too much texture in here. So I'll just kind of have a stop where it just starts to make a line going this way. See how my brush patterns are wider as I'm now in the middle of this tree trunk? There's the kiddos. Okay, next thing I want to do is make a brighter version of this color. A more intense version, meaning less gray in it, and also lighter, because I'm going to start wrapping around making the more intense highlight here. So I'm going to do the red and yellow, this time not as much black. I love using black. A lot of people don't like using black. But I find the more intense you can make your shadows, the more vivid the picture is. This is not very black. All that black is washed out and gray. But as I get to my very front foreground objects, I will use jet black on the shadows, the deepest, darkest shadows. I always try to have a part of every picture I paint that goes all the way to a full, true black, and then the brightest part to a completely saturated white. Because I want the full contrast that's possible to make the picture look vivid. Get this brighter. Okay. So just using the edge of the brush, just barely touching it on here. I'm not going to come in as far with this brighter color. This middle part I'll stay off of all but a couple tiny touches, just the edges of the higher parts of the tree bark that I want to look like they're just catching the light. Then I'll put more and more of it as I get close to this right edge. Each additional layer of highlights covers a smaller area than the layer before. I think a real common mistake is when you get real excited about the effect that a highlight has, and then you just are like, you do it everywhere. Next thing you know, it's not a highlight. Okay, put that there. Do a little more on this guy here. And once again, getting tighter with this brush pattern and the texture as I get near this right edge. I don't want a lot of the dark. I don't want any large areas of the dark color showing. Only tiny slits of it. Now this is bugging the heck out of me, so I'm going to cover that up with some. Okay. Last step to get this. Now you can keep going indefinitely with this, but you can keep adding intermediate colors in between the lightest and the darkest color. So you can get all kinds of detail, and you can get real little brush and try to make more defined bark texture, but that's not going to make the tree look more real necessarily. Getting just that perfect balance of color is really what's going to help.